Hello, everybody. My name is Rick McCutcheon. I'm a Dynamics Business Application MVP, and I want to thank you for tuning into Digital Adoption Talks. Today, there are over 300,000 business professionals with digital adoption in their job titles on LinkedIn. On this show, along with my co-host, Joachim Scheirmacher, CEO of ClickLearn, we are going to talk to some of the leading digital adoption experts in the Microsoft ecosystem, and we do have one today. This week, we're thrilled to be talking to Dynamics Business Application MVP and content creator extraordinaire, Dian Taylor. Dian, introduce yourself. Tell us who you are
Sure.
and
Well,
what you
first
do.
of all, Rick, thank you so much for having me today. I really appreciate that. Yeah, so my name is Dian Taylor. I'm also a business applications MVP for Dynamics 365 customer engagement. And I have been working with the application for, oh my goodness, since version 4.0. So it's about 12, 13 years or so. Time flies when you're having fun, right? And I actually work for RSM as a director in pre-sales, which means I get like show all the good stuff, right, to the prospects and to the customers. So yeah, it's been fun.
Okay, Dion, I've talked to you before about this, but tell us about your journey from, I'll let you tell people what you did for a living, all the way through to MVP.
Yeah, so I do not have an IT background whatsoever. I actually lived in the Netherlands first, as most people probably know by now because I keep saying it. And I was a hairdresser, and then I worked at a clothing store. So then I moved to the US, started working in the mailroom, did that for a couple of years, then had a job in HR. So I've really been dabbling everywhere. And then I got a job also in HR, but this was with a VAR. So this was a reseller. And I was able to have, after a couple of years, a conversation with leadership, kind of saying that I wanted to do something in IT versus, kind of stepping out of HR. And they came back to me and said, well, we want to sell this thing called Dynamic CRM. Are you interested? So at that point in time, I had no clue what that was, but I was very excited about it. So that's kind of how my journey got started. Yeah, it's crazy, right? But it also kind of tells you that, anybody can make that switch, right? Anybody that does not have that background in IT can get educated and work hard and basically get a career just like I did. So
And from that point to become an MVP, that's a stretch. So congratulations on being able to do that. And talk a little bit about how you started to create content and about the content that you
yeah,
create today.
so I mean, I remember like going to my first Microsoft. It was the no, not the Power Conference, Microsoft's partner conference. That was in LA in 2011, I believe, and there were obviously some MVPs presenting there. And it was just amazing to kind of interact with those people, you know what I mean? And I was kind of blown away by their knowledge. So being able to also work with Rachel Profit, who at the time was an MVP as well, and working at RSM, she kind of like mentored me and kind of helped me get on the way, so to speak. So I think I published like a little over 150. Yeah, I think it was a little over 150 articles right now on my website, which is d365goddess.com. And I really try to focus on the new stuff, right? What's coming out? What's part of the release wave? What is in preview today? Those types of things. Because it's really, for me, it's kind of like, what would I want to know? I would want to know about stuff that's coming out. So that's kind of why I've been focusing on that. And then I think it's also important that not everybody wants to read an article, right? So I always try to accompany me. Blah, I can't even say the word. I always try to put a video with the article as well, so that people that prefer to view the content versus read it also have the ability to do that as well.
Okay, Joachim, would you like to ask Dion anything?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things, I don't think anyone can become an MVP To be honest, you're saying that everyone can take your career choice. I don't think that's possible, but I think that is for the elite few, and you're obviously one of them. But I'm really curious about when you're delivering the content on your side, and you're obviously tracking everything that's happening inside D365. What do you think is the great new things that are coming now? What would you emphasize if you had like one choice of all the new features that are
I
coming out?
am so excited about what Microsoft is doing with Copilot. I know probably everybody was thinking this is going to be my answer, and unfortunately, yes, it is. Yesterday, Microsoft actually announced Copilot for field service, which is not available just yet, but it's coming out, so we can kind of experiment with that and kind of play around with that. So I'm super excited about that. Also, if you look at Copilot in sales and some of the additional things that they're planning, I just had a meeting with one of the PMs to discuss some of those things that they're working on. Unfortunately, it's under NDA, so I can't really go into detail. But yeah, really bringing AI into the equation, I think, is just so exciting and is really going to help also with the adoption of the platform, right? Which is kind of what we're talking about today as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like seeing the way that they got on scene with the entire idea around the internet
Oh,
browser,
yeah,
right?
absolutely.
It's really happening very, very fast and very
Yeah.
accelerated,
And the
right?
nice thing,
So I'm really
right?
impressed.
And the nice thing, I feel like it's not just one application, right? It's not just in
Oh,
your
it's,
CRM system. It's also in Microsoft Office and right, those types of things. So
yeah,
it's crazy what they're doing right now.
I think it's kind of expensive though, right?
I think I read it was like 30, don't hold me to this. I think it was like $30 per user for Microsoft
Per month.
365. I believe so, something like that. But if you're looking
Yeah,
at,
yeah,
for example, Sales Copilot, which is right, you have that integration with Outlook and with
yeah,
Teams, and then which is currently GA, and then later on we're going to get Sales Copilot inside of Dynamics. I know that that is part of the license if you, I believe, if you have enterprise or if you have premium currently. So for people that already have that, they can really start to take
yeah,
advantage of that today.
yeah. I think there's some really
So I think
exciting things happening as well in the Microsoft AI space. Really interesting, and we're working a lot on the Azure part of it. So on the OpenAI right now, we're integrating that completely into our
Oh yeah.
product. It's really interesting to see how many models are out there, the capabilities that you can provide virtually out of the box and put into your own solution. So it's really, really going fast. Yeah,
so when we start to look at all these new tools, and we're let's kind of bring it back to digital adoption, which it really is. So Dion, you're talking to customers a lot about at a point where they're either getting started or they're adding new functionality. So let's talk about where digital adoption comes into that conversation.
Yeah, I think it's a very important piece, right? When you're actually implementing a system, it doesn't matter what type of system that you're implementing. I think it's super important. And I think we really, especially at RSM, also, we really try to help these organizations by creating these effective onboarding strategies, right? And I think you also kind of need to think about not just the onboarding strategy, but what about after, right? Because if we're just talking about Microsoft and Salesforce and like all of these other tools that are out there today, it's constantly improving and evolving, right? So you also, I feel, need to continue on after you've implemented a system and after you've onboarded your employees, and I think it's so important as well because it really affects your ROI, right? If you have a good digital adoption strategy, and the you're going to have so much better and more efficient workflows, right? People are going to be more efficient, so the productivity is going to be so much better, which then it's kind of like a domino effect almost, right? So people are getting more productive, which means you're reducing cost, all that kind of stuff. So I definitely think it's one of the main things that kind of makes or breaks a whole software implementation, so to speak.
Okay. And Joachim, is AI going to help the user with digital adoption, or is it going to give them another level of complexity?
It's going to help them. So the straight out answer is that the level of complexity, we've been working on maybe 20 different prototypes on how do we integrate our own content, which is our entire digital adoption content, into an AI and get reasonable responses from that. So it basically means that any new employee can ask any question inside a chat, completely secure chat GPT session where your things are not going back into the general chat GPT network, and you can find that in Coca-Cola and Pepsi are mixing their things together. Everything is happening completely isolated, and the responses we are getting are out of this world. Recently we have an entire learning platform with everything that you can do inside our product, which is basically described in processes. We dumped that into an OpenAI service. Alongside that, we took our entire universe content, which is like 1,800 pages of content. Normally, it's served at sort of a course level, but we simply dumped the entire text into the AI, and we started asking questions about the software. And I got to be honest with you, there's pretty much nothing that this service does not know about our software. And if I ask anyone in my organization, there's nowhere where we have that level of knowledge around the product. So how's that going to help in your adoption? Well, imagine you're a new employee inside an organization. You need to know the processes. You don't know the business either. So you're coming into a completely new setup. You need to understand everything. And every question you ask into a chat session now tells you both about the processes, but it combines information about the business and how we do business inside our world. It's delivering a world class onboarding experience.
And it can deliver content from your library or from Dion's library, whatever is going to help that user.
Multiple sources mixed together. We can take in vendor content. We can take in the content that the customer produces, but we can also take in, let's say you have complex documents behind the scene that are either dedicated toward a specific function inside the company. It could be sales information. It could be information about delivery. We'll post that in, and we'll, depending on your role inside the business system, we'll make sure that it's only the relevant content that goes to you. And every time we serve something around a specific instruction, if you're asking something that even remotely resembles an instruction inside our system, we'll pop up that instruction. You can take it directly into your system and start working with it. So it's a new world.
So Dion, is this a game changer when we talk to customers about
I think
technology?
so.
Because do the customers have the vision, and also do they have the data that they need, because of poor digital adoption in the past to really get
Yeah,
these
that is
tools
an
to work?
excellent question, Rick. But I also wanted to kind of because Joachim was kind of talking about the internal, right? The employees accessing AI and accessing all those documents. But I also kind of want to emphasize a little bit of the customer experience, right? So, for example, think about Power Virtual Agent that you can now just point to documents that you might have, or you might have a website that you can just point it to. So the experience also from that customer perspective becomes a lot better as well, right? Because you can now use those tools to better help your customers. And again, that kind of reflects back internally as well, because if the chatbot is kind of taking care of that by using those tools like ChatGPT, et cetera, there's going to be less stress on them as well. I know it kind of like alleviate it from what you were asking, but yeah, I think it's kind of like I think you're right with probably some companies that are not there yet, right? That kind of need to get their stuff in order. I almost want to say first, and we see that a lot. Also, if even if we're not even talking about all of this type of functionality, even with like a simple CRM implementation, if you have companies that have just been working on spreadsheets and have not really, any documented processes or something, that's something that I would kind of tell them to focus on first, right? Because you want to make sure that you walk before you run. So,
So I think that's a game changer
yeah.
again for partners. We're not going to be just saying, okay, what functionality do you need, Mr. or Mrs. Customer? It's going to be like, let's look at what you're doing now and let's see how we can improve it by
Yeah,
using these
100%
technologies.
agreed. I,
Yeah,
I
exactly.
think you never should ask the customer like really too much about the software. It's more of like understanding their business, understanding what they want to accomplish as a business, right? They're not familiar with the software. So I remember when I was implementing, like I said earlier, I'm now mostly on the pre-sales side, but when I was doing implementations, a lot of times I had customers that said, I want you to build this, and it needs to do this. And I don't think that's a good way to just blindly follow what your customer is saying. I would always try to go kind of behind the, okay, why do you want to do this? What's the end goal of that? And I think that's, like you said, Rick, kind of where the partners step in, right? Really understanding it and then translating that in that digital journey that the company can take.
Joachim, would you like to add
Yeah, I
anything?
think that it's really fundamental for if you do anything that's with customer-driven innovation. It's so important that you get beneath the house, which is always what people are instructing you to do. If someone has a piece of software and they're telling you that goes for our software as well, saying that button needs to go green, you always need to understand why it needs to go green. And typically, the underlying pain that they're trying to solve by making the button green can be solved much more
Yep.
elegantly in a much better way. So we're not, if you're mindlessly taking in the input of the client and saying, I need to implement exactly what they're saying, you probably missed the entire idea around customer driven innovation. You need to ask the whys and the what you want to achieve, not so much the hows, because you have a much better understanding from a consultant or a vendor perspective on your own software. From what do we actually need to do to serve that? How can we serve that better for every client, not just for the guy who wants the green button? So I think this is absolutely right.
So, Dion, are you seeing the conversation change with customers away from we're having a CRM conversation, we're having an ERP conversation, we're having a modern workplace conversation to a conversation that here's my business and these are all business application apps that everybody's going to
Absolutely. It's so funny you said that because those were really the conversations that we used to have, right? 10 years ago, it was all very much all in his own little buckets of like the different, okay, we're talking about this system and we're talking about that system. I've always kind of tried to stay away from that regardless and kind of focus on also what Joachim was saying, right? Talk about the issues that you're facing. It's the same thing when I'm doing demos. I don't like to do overview demos because I don't think they have any value whatsoever. Tell me what your problem is that you're trying to solve today, right? And then let me show you how I can or you can utilize the software to actually remove some of those pain points. I think if you are a good partner, that's also how you're going to lead your conversations, right? It's not like, oh, let's just talk ERP and let's just talk sales or field service and that type of stuff. And especially because a lot of it is already kind of interacting with each other anyways, right? If we're talking about field service or sales, a lot of the product sets should a lot of times live in your ERP, and that just flows back and forth between some of those components. So it's, I think, very important to understand the whole picture and not just the sales part of it or the CRM part of it and then cut it off over there. So, yeah.
And if we look at it from an application perspective, I was talking to a client last year that had this grander vision of what they wanted to do with CRM, and it would have took quite an effort. And the comment was, "Well, you can do most of that in Teams today, right?" They
Yeah.
were trying to, because they hadn't really dug into Teams yet. So I think this is where the smart partners are going to really, elevate themselves above the crowd. The ones that can absorb these technologies, understand, and probably use them internally in their own
Absolutely. And
business.
like you said, also translate that to the customer, right? Kind of, I had this one demo that I did where they wanted to go through an approval process for a quote. And you can build that out. You know that probably just as as well as I do. Yes, I can build that out in Dynamics, but why wouldn't we use Teams for that, right? And then tie that data back in Dynamics so I can still read it. So those are really good examples. But like you said, you want to make sure that you work with a partner that knows all of that technology, right? And is not kind of pigeonholing into, oh, we're just doing sales, because that's when you're going to run into scenarios like that where people don't give you those solutions, right? So, yeah.
So I think our partners need to start looking at their businesses differently over the next decade to say,
Yeah.
what services am I going to provide for customers? Am I going to be the plumber that makes everything pull together and make the water flow through the business? Or am I going to be actually the designer of that system and the trainer of that system and be working with my clients on an ongoing basis to add these new technologies as they come into
Absolutely.
play?
And we also at RSM, we also say, like, look, we don't want to sell these packages of software, right? We want to sell the solution. We want to bring you a solution so that, right, like you said, everything works well together. But for that, obviously, you need to have those conversations with your prospects and your clients to fully understand the whole goal of a digital adoption platform, et cetera. Yeah.
I think when I look at this, I really like to see more partner extend their proposition beyond the implementation, right? I mean, and take the entire value chain into the customer side, and say, look, I mean, I'm gonna actually get my payment depending on not just utilization, but what are the benefits you're getting, and that includes having every user
Yeah.
adopted in there. I know that RSM is working in that way. But I see a very few. There are few amounts of partners, or very few partners that actually go in that direction. Most of them stop at the door. They deliver their
And that's
service
it.
and say, "Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure." And here's your documentation. Now it's your solution, right? We turned over the keys to the house. There might be some maintenance on this, right? And you come through the door, and it's like pouring in with rain, and the walls are falling apart. There's really no one there that takes that responsibility and brings that into the client side. I think that the clients, they're going to slowly start to expect that. If they're rolling out 178 applications inside their space, they're going to need partners that can actually take that responsibility. They just don't have the bandwidth to do the
Yeah,
rest.
absolutely.
So
And also kind
yeah.
of taking on that advisor role, I feel, as well, right? Really being that, and it's also kind of what RSM's motto is, right? Being that trusted advisor to your customers. And like you said, kind of being there if they need us, not necessarily constantly having to hold their hands, but for them to have to feel that they can reach out to the partner if need be. So I totally agree with that. Yeah.
And I think we have to get away from, and I still see this all the time, where someone's been working on a project for 2 years, and let's say we're going to roll it out in the next 90 days. Oh, we better have a conversation about training now. Who's going to train these
Yeah.
people, right?
Yeah.
Um, let's figure this out early on, as this is
Yeah.
part of the whole
Yeah.
project. Digital adoption and the use of these tools, they got to be right into the design, stay with the people as you put the project together, and when you roll it out, it's just another phase of the project. It's not an afterthought, and it's still in our partner networks today. I don't want to call it the common way of doing things, but it's happening way too many
Oh,
times still.
absolutely. Absolutely. I totally agree with that as well. I mean, it is, like you said, a very important, because that's going to really decide, that's a big piece of deciding whether or not your project is going to be successful, right? If nobody's going to adopt the software and the solution, then, how are you going to move forward? And like I said earlier as well, I think, like, being able to use some tools to kind of help guide your users through the interface and through certain tasks and what do they need to do So if we're looking at Dynamic CRM, I keep forgetting the name of it, but they have those help panes, right, that you can actually configure
Yeah.
yourself. And then one of my friends, I was going to say coworkers, we're not coworkers. One of my friends, Asif Ramani, his company actually built an amazing tool that's called Visual SP that kind of sits on top of any browser based application, and you can like build all of these user enhancements, training, I don't even know what to call it, tools, but which really are going to be so helpful, right, Rick? Also, after that training has been done, so that way you can keep everybody up to date and you can keep people engaged and keep them trained and understanding the application.
And that works really well when we're staying within an application. It's just, you know, there it's more so now, right? How do we take that across applications,
Yeah.
across the way we work, and that becomes much trickier.
Yeah.
Okay, Joachim, would you like to have any closing thoughts for today?
No, I think we've touched on most of it. I think that if user adoption had been a piece of hardware, we would have discovered this a long time ago, right? I mean, no one would expect us to roll out Dynamic CE on broken hardware, but we are capable of rolling out CE really elegantly on a completely broken user adoption model. So I think there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of making sure that we take the client that extra step and ensuring their success, because it's not only our responsibility, but it's really good business as well.
Okay, thank you. Dion, any
Yeah,
closing
I
thoughts?
I totally agree with Joachim as well, and I also think that having that conversation with the client is usually very important as well, right? Because a lot of times they don't know, right? They count on us, on our experience. So having that conversation early on, and like you said, not at the finish of the project, right? Not when we're almost done. Like having that conversation early on, I think is going to make a big impact as well.
Okay, thank you very much for your time today, and thanks for coming on Digital Adoption Talks. And Dion, I'm sure we'll be back to you in the future to hear more about what's happening at RSM around digital adoption. Have a great day. Bye for now.